Darkness falls across the land. The midnight hour is close at hand. Yet still you stand with frozen feet. You try to run, you try to scream, but no more sun you'll ever see. For evil reaches from the crypt to crush you in its icy grip. The foulest stench is in the air, the funk of 40,000 years, and grisly ghouls from every tomb are closing in to seal your doom. And though you fight to stay alive, your body starts to shiver. For no mere mortal can resist the evil of the thriller.
Greetings, spookheads. What up, spookographers? No. Salutations, fellow serial murderers. Let's get down to business. It's truly amazing how media is able to evoke such distinctive emotional responses out of its audience. Horror films, according to Wikipedia, seek to elicit fear or disgust in its audience for entertainment purposes. So, when I heard about the premise of Fear being a horror trilogy of films released together, set in different time periods, I thought it sounded fantastic. The idea of 3 films set in different time periods, giving them the opportunity to pay homage to different decades of iconic horror. This could really be something special. A love letter to the many years of famous horror films that were made for almost no money. A lot of the time, a miracle they ended up made. So, I watched Fear Streets, and they were not very good. Mostly high budget, exposition filled, having a lackluster style, forgettable characters, and were just overall boring. Which, it sucks, because I wanted to like them. So this isn't going to be an in-depth takedown of those movies, going through every little detail, and it's fine if you like them. They were surprisingly safe and crowd-pleasing for a horror movie. But this left me with a question I felt I needed to explore. Is the horror genre not very good? Or rather, is the foundations of horror that Fear Street is attempting to imitate inadequate? My hypothesis is of course not. They're iconic films for a reason. To demonstrate this, I'm going to watch and review a crapload, 42, of the most iconic horror films, and even sprinkle in some of my favourites. In no particular order.
There's going to be spoilers, so there'll also be time codes.
In doing this, we'll see where Fear Street went wrong. Not all of these are going to be amazing movies. However, by the end, I hope we'll have a grasp of what I like the most and what makes a great horror film. So join me on this 4-part journey. That's right, I'm petty, I'll one-up you, Fear Street. And if anyone knows anything about iconic horror franchises and the diminishing returns of anything but the first one, then strap in, boys and girls, this is going to be a long one.
What a perfect place to start. This movie is oppressive. Like, it's impressive how oppressive it is. Texas Chainsaw seems very much like a trendsetter for low-budget horror. Every element in this film is just yuck. The characters, the locations, the conversations, the murders. This extends to the filmmaking, how it's cut. Everything had to be cheap and scratchy, covered in muck. The story isn't really anything meaningful. There isn't satisfying payoffs. In fact, the setups purposefully hurt the audience. But it all gives this a more real, gross aesthetic, which reflects real situations in the real world, which are commonly awful. The whole film has this feeling of just scraping by. Everything is just tied together by enough maggots and human hair to be on our screens. I expect this won't be the last we'll see of the abandoned house in the middle of nowhere trope. The idea that all of this is based on a true story is believable. It adds to the uncompromisingly disturbed atmosphere. The movie doesn't even show that much, and yet I hated the experience, which is good. When the woman gets hoisted onto the meat hook, we don't really see it. But we don't need to, because our monkey brain will do the cringing for us. Similarly, during the dinner scene with all the rotten food, I'm not thinking, wow, those props look great, knowing this is a low-budget piece of shit film. All that real, rotten food is making me want to puke. This isn't fun, it isn't appealing, it's horrific. Which is exactly what you want. In contrast, look at the Netflix budget Fear Street, so worried with its shitload of pop music.
I'm only happy when it rains. I'm only happy when it...
Scared that people would be unengaged. At no point did I feel like people making the movie were scraping by. They could actually afford locations, which further damns those movies. Texas Chainsaw has the balls to want people to leave the cinema, and would probably cut those balls off too, just to make you cringe. It's not trying to appeal to the widest audience. Now sure, these low-budget horrors are gonna have to concede aspects due to lack of resources. However, it's how they manage to still just scrape by that makes them so great. 8 out of 10.
The scene of the crime.
If Texas Chainsaw is the dirty, rough, oppressive film that revels in its low budget, pushes the audience to the extreme of what they're willing to accept is actually happening on screen, then Psycho is the prestige clean film, full of applaudable technique to keep the audience on the edge of its seat in every scene. Both Texas and Psycho use the trick of not showing the audience too much to really accentuate the horror. However, Texas is a gruesome, horrid experience on screen as well. It has to insist the extreme of what is happening. Psycho uses editing and cuts in contrast to draw tension from even the most mundane scenes, like being pulled over by a cop, buying a used car, conversations with strangers.
You mean an institution?
These are all circumstances the audience can relate to with a certain amount of anxiety. Psycho then turns the dial up to 11 with its spinning plates, score, and editing, even scenes where you most definitely shouldn't feel any anxiety for that character, like Norman waiting for the car to sink. Still brings tension just from what it shows and how it's cut. Even knowing the killer Norman bait out twist and the infamous shower scene, the film, not unexpectedly, still worked. Even more so when the main character died at the halfway mark and the film essentially rebooted itself with side characters. I imagine there's not much I could say that hasn't already been said.
A little more sinister looking.
And that's easy to see why when you watch the film. To be critical, I feel they introduced too many new cop characters in the final 30 minutes. Additionally, the final speech explaining everything isn't great.
Yes. And no.
Plus, there isn't really a good payoff for the money. That final shot though, chef kiss. 9.5 out of 10. Beware of wooden surfaces. They are not safe. Demons will get you. I love the tension that Psycho created from even the mundane. However, the evil... takes a bit of a different approach to horror. As in, a lot of blood and unrelenting attacks. Hey look Ash, you're in for a real rough night buddy, strap in. It's eerie how it's actually kind of funny. But then when it comes down to spooks, it delivers in spades. It becomes clear going into the final half that Bruce Campbell is not about to catch a break, and it's so perfect how unrelenting the film is. There's no filler. What's also perfect is the pacing. It's brief and engaging. However, you still feel like you've experienced an entire night of terrors, and you're just holding on to the idea of daylight and relief. The score is fantastic, Ash is great, even if the other characters are entirely forgettable, and there's no story as such. The effects are crazy good for a horror movie, even more outstanding for a low-budget first feature. Oh sorry, did I mention the blood? Just an absolute shitload of blood, what the fuck? Once again, we see the appearance of the abandoned house in the middle of nowhere staple of low-budget horror. Reading behind the scenes and the troubles of making the movie, and how the majority of the main actors on the film ditched at the halfway mark, thus you end up with these stand-ins playing the ghouls in the later half, plus the below zero temperatures in the bush with no accommodation. Much like Bruce Campbell's character, this film fits the theme of only just scraping by. I will quickly comment on the notorious tree rape scene, not that I'm in the position to really add anything to that debate. I think the scene works the way the tree constricts her, and as her clothes get shredded, leaving her in a state of undress, it instills this sense of ultimate vulnerability. It makes you feel uncomfortable. However, as the scene becomes more explicit, like when the branch impales her through the vagina, it's too much and a bit silly. The result is distaste. I think if the scene ended earlier with her escaping, as she eventually does, you would avoid the controversy and end up with a stronger film. Wrapping this up, let me mention again the practical effects are so good. The gore, the melting people, the reverse shot trees, and the blood over the projector I all love, which plus the charisma of Bruce Campbell makes me find this slightly stronger than Texas Chainsaw. Like, it legitimately feels like a decade of progress since Texas Chainsaw in terms of filmmaking and the horror genre. 8.5 out of 10.
Wow, it seems pretty clear cut. How many more of these do we have? Seems like we're good to wrap up. The answer seems obvious. Well, Fear Street, you're not getting off that easy. Welcome to the horror show.
What the fuck? No one told me Halloween score was this good. Like straight up, the score and music cues in this, so good. The opening through the perspective of Michael, absolutely brilliant. Because if these victims that we're watching aren't noticing, then it instills this vulnerability in the audience that maybe we're not so safe after all. I love how confident the film is with its wide shots. There's always so much to look at on the screen, and yet everywhere feels empty with only danger to fill it. It savors its cuts, then comes in brutally close for the action. The atmosphere the movie creates is so tangible, and having no real conclusion, it follows you after the credits. It blurs the boundaries. Psycho created tension in the mundane. Halloween creates danger in every scene. Having Michael be such an unrelenting villain. Fear Street, take notes, my dude. My dude? Yeah, whatever. When watching most of Fear Street, it's very obvious what its intentions are for each scene. Now it's time for teen drama. Okay, now it's quote-unquote spooks time. Oh, now we're doing exposition and detective work. Oh look, another 90s pop song, fucking kill me. Also, this might be a nitpick, but if you're gonna have the year the movie set in the title, some basic consistency with the music, wouldn't be bad. In Halloween, everything blends so unbelievably well. The score is so consistent, so while there is like a stinger that's common to the more spooky moments, the rest of the score doesn't release tension because at a Pingu the fucking Pingu Peng. Fuck! The rest of the score doesn't release tension because at a single piano key and we're back to ultimate fear. It's not perfect, some of the dialogue is wooden, and there's a scene just as the action starts to pick up where we cut back to the doctor character and he's like, oh, you better believe this Michael fella, he's dangerous. He'll kill people, you should be scared. And I'm like, yeah bro, I just saw him cut this girl's neck open. I think I'm in the right mindset. The kill scenes are shot so well, and they're creative and visceral. Textbook examples of great jump scares. Take this one. We've had some decent build up. It's been quiet for a large chunk, so it's not obvious. She gets in the car. Something is up. The front window is fogged. It draws your attention there, and bang! It strikes. 9 out of 10.
I plan on making popcorn and watching Dr. Dementia. 6 straight hours of horror movies.
Yeah, 6 hours. That's about how long this video took. 6 hours. Okay, hear me out. It's a beach, and it makes you old. To be honest here, I included this as a joke. At the very least, the first Fear Street is better and just way more competent. The difference is, however, that Fear Street was fairly boring. Old is so stupid and ridiculous, it is unintentionally a great comedy. Like one of the first lines said in the film, her spontaneity has been stripped. I laughed for so long.
Her spontaneity has been stripped from her.
Said the 6-year-old child. Holy shit, this movie's so bad. Okay, moving on. I would quickly say that I got way more entertainment value out of this one than Fear Street, but I would probably rewatch at least the first Fear Street before I'd watch this again. I mean, shout out to Thomason.
You're an adult.
You were great in Jojo Rabbit. I'm sure you'll be great in Last Night in Soho. Commendable effort. Couldn't save this trash fire of a film. 2 out of 10. They're coming to get you, Barbara.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Listen, in terms of horror roots and popularizing concepts, Night of the... was just about the start, and with it being a 60s independent movie, it shows its age. I wasn't massive on this, however there's a lot to appreciate here, like the idea of the zombie apocalypse,
has concluded that the unburied dead are coming back to life and seeking human victims.
the trope of human conflict during the apocalypse, the flesh eating. Additionally, it helps that the film is really refined, because for me, the sound design and the shot composition really carries most of the film, which honestly can be boring. Like, don't get me wrong, the final 20 minutes are fantastic. The kid killing her own mother, our main character forced to shoot people who were alive moments ago. It's just all the build up isn't great. And well, I know it's tough competition, but 8 years earlier, Psycho basically perfected tension, and this just doesn't really compete. Also, mild nitpick, but literally the fire in Living Dead was more enjoyable to me than in Fear Street. Fucking got him. I do love the idea of 60s audiences being turned off by the very mild, by today's standards, horror, even though the violence in this is fairly prominent. I also wonder if the naked zombie was where they drew the line. No, zombies believable. Nudity, this is too far for me.
That's a challenging wank.
Kudos to this movie for everything it will inspire. Well, not everything. It put zombies and this idea of inhuman horror on the board. As such, it has its place in the history books. 7 out of 10. With Evil Dead and Texas, and even Night of the Living Dead, it's easy when you watch those to see how they became so iconic in terms of horror. and more specifically, low-budget horror. However, when it comes to bad... You really feel the low-budget aspects, and even knowing this was made for pocket change doesn't alleviate the, well, poor taste. It leaves in your mouth. Like, this is quite literally a film some New Zealand fellas cooked up in their spare time. I mean, you might have heard of one of them, Peter Jackson. Like, they made this entire thing over many weekends in their free time. But the score feels like the exact same song looped for the whole film. This needed to be like 15 minutes shorter, the acting is non-existent, plus the dialogue is just not great, and I could assume it's improv. However, the gore and practical effects should be praised for such a low-budget film. Remember, this is made in the 80s when independent filmmaking was basically impossible, even more so in New Zealand. So really, it's a miracle that anyone ever saw this. It has some funny moments in its off-kilter humour, and in all honesty, it has some real charm I wasn't expecting. Like, it is really easy to see how, with an actual budget and crew, this could be a fantastic film, which is even more disappointing when compared with the Netflix money thrown towards Fear Street and the total lack of charm in those movies. I feel like I should mention this features a scene where Peter Jackson headbutts a seagull. Furthermore, this scene in the climax legitimately made me laugh out loud. 5.5 out of 10. I guess the hope is that Bad Taste would be able to put Peter Jackson on the map to allow him to properly fulfill his creative vision on screen in all its glory. Anyway, let's talk about Peter Jackson's Braindead. I have never been so disgusted while also completely laughing my ass off at the same time. The movie is everything I wanted Bad Taste to be. It's so funny. The dialogue is exquisite.
Devil is amongst us. Stay back, boy. This calls for divine intervention.
Your mother's dead, Lionel. Some of my best friends are pedophiles. The entire movie takes place in the New Zealand suburbs, which all in all feels very close to home. Just the way people speak, the cricket references. There's a character who only talks about rugby.
And the ball rolls free, so I scooped it up. And you know what I did?
And we cut back to him after an entire afternoon and night of in movie time, and he's still talking about rugby.
Fooled them completely. Now you got to imagine this is like 10, 15 yards out from the sideline.
It's the surreal world of what weird, unsettling British exports make it to New Zealand and Australia. The horrific gross-out comedy bits had me laughing out loud by myself. The fight in the baby in the park.
So I sit.
They all came out of the ground like a jack-in-the-box. The rag dolls. The monkey death. There's an attempt at a story, but it doesn't really matter. I would say my greatest issue is that the music isn't great. It's passable, but compared to the amazing score of Evil Dead or Halloween, this doesn't compare. Furthermore, this is similar to Evil Dead in its splatter bloody horror, but Braindead is far more focused on comedy, while Evil Dead is scarier. I will say, in general, this is a gory movie. However, the climax, which involves a lawnmower and a group of zombies, really take it next level. I doubt anything is going to top the body parts and blood that's everywhere in this scene. Even though the movie doesn't end there, it doesn't try to top that, and the final conflict is quite brief, which is good because you're not gonna top that. In fact, I doubt any movie will top that. 8 out of 10. Well, here we are. This is entirely the direct inspiration for part 2 of Fear Street. Not that it's trying to hide that fact. Unfortunately, Friday the feels like a rip-off of Halloween and Psycho. The horror elements are here, but everything is just weaker in comparison. Like especially the perspective shots, which very much sit in the shadow of the masterclass filmmaking that Halloween had on display. It uses the Psycho orchestral singers and kill scene editing. It's just sloppier. Even more so as they're allowed to show way more in terms of blood and gore, but the impact is less. Everything is just not creative. Speaking of creative, or rather not, the story is eerily similar to Psycho, but missing all the stakes and just feels like a bad imitation in parts.
Going to play strip Monopoly.
Strip Monopoly? What? Also, they use like the same pickup line for two different characters.
All the girls up there gonna look as good as you?
Not at all.
You really think there'll be other gorgeous women at Camp Crystal Lake besides yourself?
Oh, I'd better write that down. Oh, all the girls I'll get with this. There's bafflingly little setup for what is a bunch of final act reveals. Like, definitely building up the mystery would have helped, especially with setting up actual stakes. Let's give the film some praise. The summer camp location, I think, is a great choice. It's a good excuse to get a bunch of horny teenagers into an isolated area with some mild variety in environments. The is so good, it's iconic. The film's a brief 95 minutes, which is a good length for these kind of movies, which is why Fear Street Part 2 being nearly 2 hours is unacceptable. It does not justify its length. Furthermore, the fact Friday the 13th is already kind of a second-rate Halloween and Psycho means that it's probably not the strongest direct inspiration for your horror movie. It's kind of like a copy of a copy at this point. I will say this does feel like a particularly cursed episode of Scooby-Doo, and I find enjoyment in that. However, this hasn't propelled me into wanting to watch its endless sequels. 5 out of 10! Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. I don't really like this one. The is really scary. Okay. But I imagine the start of this movie really unsettled much of the Western audience in its Middle East location. Already you're spooking the Americans. And that location was North Iraq in 1973, so I'm sure Iraq's future is looking extremely bright, especially around, I don't know, 2003?
On my orders.
The opening works because on first watch you have no idea what it means yet. When you're watching it, you're waiting for the penny to drop, and it doesn't, and that uncertain feeling follows you into the film. The mix of inhuman supernatural horror and watching the impact it has on the people around them is frightening. I think this is where The Exorcist stands out compared to Evil Dead and Texas Chainsaw, which mostly take place in an isolated area away from society. However, here we have doctors and cops and priests, and we watch the majority of them fail to save this child. Man, the editing is so good. The face that occasionally appears in the first half is so effective. I would say there's some poor pacing around side stories, like with the police officers and doctors, just drag the movie down a bit. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. But yeah, there's no more putting this off. This is the scariest one I've watched so far. So yeah, let's give some context. I had tacos for dinner. Tacos are a good thing. So there I am, sitting in my room alone with my noise-cancelling headphones, enjoying the first 10 minutes. Now, essentially from the fire flaring up in the attic, I started to tense. So what you would have is just silence as I'm sitting there tensed up, then something spooky would go down, and you would hear just hysterical laughter. As we moved into the second half, that all changed. The environment of despair had escalated. Everyone was so drained. I think for me, that first meeting with the priest is the turning point, when the sound design just hits. The backwards speaking, the profanity, the inhuman voices coming out of this little girl.
Fuck me! Fuck me! Fuck me!
The non-stop baby cow dying sound you hear through the walls, my lord! From then on, there's no respite. There was a point where I realized I was sweating, so I pulled the blankets off. For the rest of the movie, it's just total silence from me, and this sinking, uncomfortable feeling. I'll tell you what, at the climax of this movie, my jaw hit the ground. The entire solution to the exorcism was so quick compared to everything else. Plus, just watching him hit the stairs and the crowd appear, my god. I didn't expect this film to be so effective, and I struggle to work out what it is that made it so good. I think it's the nightmare sound design and the visible consequences the possession has on everyone around Regan. It instills this eternal anguish. Oh, 9 out of 10.
It's an honor to meet you, Father.
And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
You know, I love to talk film, discuss, to critique.
Okay, motherfucker, too close to home. Well, if there was gonna be a movie to end on, this is the one. So don't For me, this feels like the perfect follow-up to Halloween. And I'll tell you what, this movie is not afraid to show where its inspiration came from. In fact, my main criticism would be that it's kind of cheating just how much this film relies on Halloween. However, this film can be praised for what it updates. It's the 90s, baby! VHS is here, mobile phones, they exist now.
What are you doing with a cellular telephone, son?
Moral panic over suburbia serial killers, the press being dickheads. It's totally a smart move to change from the often inhuman force of Michael Myers and Leatherface to the villain that taunts its victims.
No, you listen, you little bitch. You hang up on me again, I'll gut you like a fish, understand?
And just generally causes shenanigans. Speaking of shenanigans, bastard of a twist. I was trying so damn hard to work out the killer, and I played straight into the movie's hand. Extra points for being super meta when it definitely wasn't hip to be meta.
Behind you. Turn around. Behind you. Oh.
This being the direct inspiration for the first Fear Street is really clear. I think the problem is that Scream did its homework beyond a doubt. From what the characters say to the on-screen in-jokes.
Oh, you want to play psycho killer? Can I be the helpless victim? Okay, let's see. No, please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
On top of that, it plays with horror cliches extremely well, and often in a subversive way.
A very simple formula! Everybody's a suspect!
I find it really interesting that Fear Street Part 1 borrows so much from this, but fails to subvert any of the tropes, instead relying on them. It feels like it kind of missed the point of Scream there, failing to build and develop the horror genre. Also, I thought the first 30 minutes of this film were really scary, especially the cold open and Sydney's first phone call interaction. I was on the edge of my seat. I think it's the way that Ghostface had a more human quality to him. He would come scrambling through that door quickly or sprinting down a hallway. Plus, the voice and taunts were just unsettling.
So where are you?
Right here.
The score wasn't great. It also cheated and use the Halloween score for some parts, which, fair enough, the Halloween score is brilliant. The soundtrack, however, is handled well, especially considering it's the 90s, baby! It wasn't overbearing in scenes like the Peaky Blinders theme song almost was. But it didn't pick the most obvious songs like some other movies I know, Fear Street, which, by the way, has 19 needle drops. 19! That's too many needle drops, bro! Oh man. I do think as we head into the second half, it gets too wrapped up in horror jokes and subversions, less interested in being scary as such, but that's okay. It's still a fun mystery thriller. You wanna see something really spooky? 8 out of 10!
We're gonna carry on and plan the sequel, cause let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel!
Damn right! You know we do! You know what we do! Fucking moron.
Wow, maybe you're thinking, that was pretty sweet. We talked about some great movies, occasionally complained about some bad movies. Turns out, horror, good, actually. Fear Street just missed the mark. So here we are, folks, at the end of part 1. Listen, if Psycho and Halloween get sequels, then this spook train ain't stopping for no one. And if you think I'm finished talking about great horror movies and Fear Street, you're wrong. You read the title, I'm going to extraordinary lengths to prove Fear Street fucked up. Or maybe it's just an excuse to watch and review some horror films. Does it matter? So join me on this journey, because I've only just started. Next time we're looking mainly at 80s sci-fi horror. Ooh. Keep tuned for the next part in the following days. Ooh, weeks? Months?